What's up, peeps? I want to talk about democracy because we hear a lot of things, especially after what was just the most important election in our lifetime, about democracy. About saving our democracy, about restoring our democracy, about fixing our democracy, about making democracy work. And I would propose to you that a broken democracy is redundant. Democracy itself is a broken way of problem solving. There is nothing wrong with democracy. There is only something wrong with your perception of democracy. Democracy is working just fine. To quickly define democracy, it is only a process of problem solving. It is an electoral process, which is voting to reach a majority or a consensus, at which point the majority determines the outcome for the whole. Democracy is a process of problem solving. It just sucks. And there's a really obvious way that it sucks. You can tell that it sucks. And then there's just all of its inherent problems. So first, democracy, it clearly sucks because it has to be enforced. It has to be enforced on people by the guns of the state. If democracy was such a great thing, if people wanted democracy, if democracy worked, then it wouldn't need to be enforced violently. If democracy was such a great thing, then people would just be using the democratic process all the time. People would be getting together and saying, oh, where do you want to go for dinner? Well, let's take a vote, and everyone agrees to be bound by the vote, and this and that and the other. But you never see that. When people get together and they come up with their own types of problem solving, rarely, almost never, do people use anything resembling the democratic process, especially not outside of just getting an opinion of like, oh, well, where would you like to go? Where would you like to go? What would you like to do? What would you like to do? That sort of thing. Essentially gauging opinions. But people don't just voluntarily get together and then say, okay, well, we're going to vote on something and we all agree to be held by the vote, and well, if people don't agree, then we're going to force them. You know, if this guy doesn't want to go out to dinner with us, well, then we're going to kick your ass if you don't want to go out to dinner with us. And oh, well, you know, when we get to dinner, you're going to order something and this and that and the other. Or, you know, if you don't like it, well, then you could pay for dinner. Well, you don't want to pay for dinner? Well, we're going to vote. We voted. You're paying for dinner. Nobody solves problems like that. Nobody interacts with other people like that, because problem solving, even in a basic sense of what are we going to have for dinner or what are we going to do today, those types of things, it requires the input of people and the consideration of everyone's opinions and desires and abilities and all kinds of things. So problem solving is very complex, and democracy assumes that by just taking this vote that things would come out okay, which is completely wrong. I mean, if we can't even... If you wouldn't trust your neighborhood to vote on what you're going to eat for dinner tonight, well, then why are you going to trust 300 million people to decide what plant we're going to put people into jail for? That's stupid. Secondly, democracy has all kinds of problems in and of itself, starting from, scalability, it's a logistical problem, it crushes minorities, it only measures the breadth, not the depth, and there is a huge problem of democracy clashing with principle. It's just a terrible mode of problem solving in and of itself. So scalability is the first problem with democracy, and so democracy might work on a small scale. It might work for 5 people, assuming they all agree to it. And this is, of course, all of these are assuming that the violence of the state is not required to enforce any of these things, but just as themselves, as problem solving methods or ideas, they don't work. So in any sort of democratic vote, I'm going to represent myself, and you are going to represent yourself. So the problem becomes, as it scales up, you can't have everybody representing themselves in that kind of way. For example, in passing legislation in a country with 300 million people, how much work does it take to get 300 million people to pass one particular thing? And I would actually argue that that's probably a good thing that it would take so long. I mean, imagine how many less ridiculous laws we would have if that was the case. But it's not, because government is all about expediency and power and control. So what we have done is we elect representatives to represent us. And so theoretically, these representatives are supposed to represent our best interest. However, the representatives, just like I would or you would, are going to vote and behave in their own self-interest. So this idea that somehow you're going to you're going to elect a representative and they're going to represent you is preposterous, unless you are a corporation with a lot of money or a big voting bloc. Because the way this person gets elected is by getting enough votes. So they have to respond to the people who are giving them the most votes. By itself, it's completely unscalable. But even in terms of then electing a representative, that defies human nature, because representatives aren't going to represent you or really anyone else. Representatives are going to represent what's best for them in order to stay representing, because they get paid for it. So this idea that somehow representatives are going to represent anybody, it just defies human nature. Second is logistics. It's difficult to find common ground between two individuals. So I'm an individual, you're an individual. In order for us to find common ground, we'd have to talk, we'd have to figure out what you want, what I want, all of this type of stuff. But the problem is that as more people get involved, the things that are going to be acceptable to more people have to be reduced in terms of becoming more basic. So as an example, what you and I could agree to eat for dinner would be different than what 10 people could agree on what they're going to eat for dinner. And then what 10 people could finally agree on what they're going to eat for dinner would have to become even more basic to accompany the tastes of 100 people or 1,000 people or 1,000,000 people, which, number one, is evidenced in fast food, how the tastes are so bland and standard and basic as to apply to 1,000,000 people. Also, the quality of it is lowered. So I address this in my book, Hate the Game, how the more individuals that become involved, the less the quality of the result. Because the result has to appeal then to a broader audience. And in order to appeal to the broader audience, it has to become more basic in its essence. Which leads me into the way that democracy crushes minorities. So democracy is all about the majority, which makes the decision for the whole. So what that means then is that if you're in the 49%, or if you're in any number of minorities that equates the 49%, or like in the last election, if you're in the 45% of people who didn't even vote, then you will be crushed by whatever decisions the majority wants to come to. And so people think like, oh, well, in a healthy democracy, this works. But there's no real healthy way to stamp out the individuality or the actions of 49% of the people and call that healthy. So that kind of defies common sense of, oh, well, we're going to have just one group, 51%, or however many, that, the consensus in our majority, it's something like 30% of people, or, somewhere around there, that makes the decision for everyone else, at least in terms of the president. And then everyone else is going to get crushed by that thing. So whatever group that it is, they squash out all the minorities. So if you're in the minority and you think, oh, well, what I need to do is I need to get in the majority and make the decision, that's a never-ending thing. It's never going to happen because everyone else is trying to get in the majority. Because democracy isn't about good problem solving. It's not about ethics. It's not about treating you with respect or allowing you to have your individuality. It's about the conformity of the whole. So whatever the majority decides, the whole have to conform to that. So minorities are crushed, inequality is increased, diversity is crushed. Democracy is just terrible for anybody who's not in the complete majority. So if you are in some sort of minority and you think that the majority is going to give you the rights or give you the benefits, that's probably never going to happen. Democracy covers the breadth and not the depth. So what I mean by that is that democracy allows everyone to express an opinion, but it doesn't measure how far people are willing to go to carry out that opinion. So everyone might say, oh, well, we're really much in favor of going to war with this other country. But how many people are then willing to pack up their bags, grab a gun, fly on a plane, and go enforce that decision on the other country? How many people are really willing to go to war in the sense that they're willing to do what it takes? Because, I really dislike beans. So if I was given a vote that said, hey, beans are healthy, should everybody eat beans? Well, I might vote yes, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to go eat beans or that I'm going to go buy beans or cook them for myself or anyone else that I know, or that I'm even going to go get a gun and then enforce that everybody else should eat beans. So it's completely preposterous in the way that voting only measures the opinion. It doesn't measure how much people are willing to act in order to express those opinions in the real world. And lastly, the reason that I find the most compelling against democracy is that democracy defies principle. Democracy presupposes that the things voting on can actually be affected or changed by the vote. And when it comes to moral principle or universals or logic, that's not true. You can't put 2 + 2 = 5 on a ballot and then, if we get 51% of people to vote on it, well then it must be the case. Or if we put, which way does gravity go, up or down? If we put that on the ballot, that's not going to have the result of the election is not going to have any bearing on the actual effect of gravity. So how much more in violation of natural law has democracy become, where we can, if I commit murder in my private life, well, that's murder. But if we vote on it and make it legal, well, that's not murder. Or if I go steal from somebody, well, that's theft. And if I go steal from them and give it to charity, well, that's theft. But if we vote and make it into law, well, we'll call it taxes and welfare, or whatever, whatever other program you want to call it. And then we'll say, oh, well, it's for the social good, and we'll manipulate the language and all this kinds of stuff. But at the root of a lot of this is how democracy provides cover for turning illegitimate things into supposedly legitimate things by violating the principle. If stealing is wrong, then stealing is wrong. Or if murder is wrong, well, then murder is wrong. It doesn't matter if, 3 people are hanging out and 2 of them vote to beat somebody and take their money. Well, people say, well, that's illegal. Well, what if they just voted to make it legal? What if we just vote to go around robbing whoever we want? It's ridiculous. It's completely ridiculous. But voting provides the illusion of free choice. It provides the illusion of legitimacy to things that are illegitimate. And it provides a way for people to violate natural law and make them feel good about it, when that should never be the case. So if you ever catch yourself wondering, why does it seem like this democracy is failing? Well, because broken democracy is redundant. Democracy is made to fail. Democracy is made to be a terrible way of problem solving. It's made to be illegitimate. It's made to only measure opinion and not actual action. It's made to crush minorities. It's made to defy human nature, and it's made, in its essence, it's made to increase the mediocrity of all the solutions. In fact, to the basis level, the more it scales up, the worse the solutions are going to become, guaranteed. Now you can just you can write that in stone. And I'm not a big fan of appeals to authority or quotes and all that kinds of stuff, but for those of you who think this is a radical idea, well, here's a couple quotes for you. Remember, democracy never lasts long. It soon wastes, exhausts, and murders itself. And that from John Adams of Founding Fathers fame. Democracy passes into despotism, from Plato. Or democracy is the road to socialism, Karl Marx. Or this gem from Michael Bloomberg, who said, I don't believe that government is good at picking technology, particularly technology that is changing. By the time you get it done and go through democracy, it's so outdated. And Michael Bloomberg could have just saved us all 20 seconds of our time by stopping at and ending with anything. So whenever you look at our country and you think, oh man, we have so many problems, if only we could save our democracy, it's never going to happen, because democracy is the root of so many of the problems that we are facing, from the two-party system to the terrible solutions to the ridiculous laws, all of these things. Democracy is the root of all of these things, of people not being able to represent themselves, of people being violently forced into a terrible method of problem solving, or of laws being so basic that they apply to so many people. Those are results of democracy, and democracy is a terrible method of problem solving that creates more problems than it solves. Democracy is a tool of the institution, and the institution is the enemy of humanity.